The gentle morning sun cast a warm and golden glow over the quiet office of Mr. Barnaby Jones. Barnaby, a man whose silver hair and kind smile spoke of a lifetime of wisdom and patience, sat comfortably behind his polished wooden desk. He was a private investigator, but not the rough and weary kind one might read about in cheap pulp fiction. Barnaby possessed a grandfatherly charm, a sharp mind, and a deep appreciation for the simple joys of life, such as a peaceful afternoon of fishing. Across the room stood Betty, his bright, energetic, and endlessly supportive daughter-in-law. She was the heart of the office, keeping their files organized and their spirits high. On this particular morning, the peaceful atmosphere of their office was interrupted by the arrival of a gentle but deeply worried woman named Mrs. Helena Gorman. She wore a simple dress and carried a worn handbag, her eyes reflecting the heavy burden of a family in distress. Barnaby offered her a comfortable chair and a warm cup of tea, encouraging her to share her troubles at her own pace. Mrs. Gorman took a deep breath and began her story. Her husband, Nick, had recently traveled to a scenic mountain town called Parker Junction in Northern California. He went there to meet an old friend from his military days, a man named Johnny Arthur. Nick had promised her that he would return with $5,000, perhaps even more. It was money they desperately needed. Their twin children needed new clothes for the upcoming school year. Their rent was nearly 4 months overdue, and a mountain of other bills had steadily piled up on their kitchen table. Nick had called her one evening, sounding confused and anxious. He told her that Johnny Arthur had never shown up in Parker Junction. Then, tragically, Nick was involved in a terrible automobile accident. The local authorities called it a hit and run. He had passed away, leaving Helena alone with her children and a heart full of unanswered questions. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Gorman," Barnaby said softly, his voice full of genuine empathy. "This must be incredibly difficult for you." "Thank you, Mr. Jones," she replied, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "The reason I am here is because nothing makes sense. Why has Johnny Arthur not contacted us? Nick went up there to meet him, and Johnny has been missing for over 6 weeks. And what happened to the money Nick was supposed to bring home? I cannot help but think he was followed and hurt because of it." Barnaby nodded slowly, piecing together the fragments of her story. Betty, who had learned the fine art of investigation from her late husband Hal, looked at Barnaby with a knowing expression. "What is it Hal always said, Betty?" Barnaby asked with a fond smile. "He always said that you always said, 'Look for the obvious,'" Betty replied, her eyes shining with determination. "Right," Barnaby agreed. He turned his attention back to the widow. "We will gladly look into this for you, Mrs. Gorman. Do not worry about the fee right now. We will work that out later. For now, we just want to help you and your twins find some peace." After Mrs. Gorman left the office, feeling a little more hopeful than when she had arrived, Barnaby and Betty immediately set to work. Barnaby instructed Betty to dig into the back issues of newspapers from Parker Junction and the surrounding areas. He wanted her to look back at least 6 or 7 weeks for any story that involved quick money. He also asked her to obtain the full police report regarding the hit-and-run incident. "What do you really hope to find up there?" Betty asked, leaning over his desk. Barnaby chuckled, a warm sound that filled the room. "A lake," he said simply. "I never did get a chance to try out that beautiful new fishing rod you gave me for my birthday. There is a lovely lake right outside of town. Oh, and one other thing. The driver who ran down Mr. Gorman might have enough insurance to cover a generous death benefit for the widow. That is, if we can find him. Have confidence, Betty. Have confidence." The journey to Parker Junction was a delightful drive through towering green pine trees and crisp mountain air. Barnaby felt a sense of rejuvenation as he navigated the winding roads. Upon arriving in the small, picturesque town, he immediately noticed that things were not quite as tranquil as the scenery suggested. His first stop was the local boat rental dock on the edge of the sparkling blue lake. A man named Andy Spake was standing on the dock, looking nervously over his shoulder. Barnaby approached him with a friendly wave and his brand-new fishing rod in hand. "Excuse me, friend," Barnaby said cheerfully. "I was hoping to rent a boat and get a little fishing in." Spake frowned, crossing his arms defensively. "We are closed for the season." "Oh, that is a pity," Barnaby replied, looking thoughtfully at the fleet of freshly painted, expensive-looking new boats tied to the dock. "A man has a good business here, a bunch of brand-new boats, turning away eager customers." "We could not let the boats go out in the wind like this," Spake argued, though the breeze was barely strong enough to rustle the leaves. "Anyway, the fact is, I am closed for the season." Barnaby smiled, unbothered by the chilly reception. "I just happened to be driving by, and I saw you. I thought I would tell you that I used to run a place like this once upon a time. Do you think it would do any harm if I just fished off the end of your dock here? I will need some bait, though. I use 2 hooks. Salmon eggs on one and cheese on the other. I get remarkable results with that combination." Spake looked utterly bewildered by the old man's pleasant rambling. "I have to go, Mr. Jones. I will sell you the bait, and then you have to leave." "I appreciate that," Barnaby said, intentionally ignoring the fact that he had never introduced himself by name. "Did I mention my name?" "Oh, I must have, or you would not have known it. It is funny how a person introduces himself and then forgets he did it." Leaving Spake to his nervous thoughts, Barnaby wandered into the center of town. He decided to visit the local real estate office, run by a woman named B. Johnson. The door was open, so he stepped inside. B was a sharply dressed woman who looked as though she had recently come into a great deal of sudden wealth. Barnaby casually examined a large map of the county pinned to the wall. "Is there something I can do for you?" B asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "The door was open, so I came in," Barnaby answered mildly. "I have been looking at your map. I was noticing this beautiful parcel of land here, about 242 acres. That is the Eli Ryle Ranch," B said quickly. "It is not on the market. I see you have a red pin stuck in it," Barnaby pointed out with innocent curiosity. "Unless I am wrong, that usually means a property is for sale." "Oh my, did I forget to remove that?" B stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Mr. Ryle simply changed his mind about selling." Barnaby nodded thoughtfully. "That is a pretty big first mortgage he had on that place, is it not? I noticed in your listing book that he paid it off. Did he pay off the second mortgage too? Sounds like he came into a substantial amount of money recently." B grew visibly flustered. "Why are you asking all these questions?" "I am just interested in the price of real estate up here," Barnaby replied with a polite tip of his hat. He then complimented her on her shiny new luxury automobile parked outside, noting her private license plates. Leaving B to fret over his questions, Barnaby continued his stroll through town. Next, he visited the general store, which was owned by a man named John Flory. Flory also managed the town garage and issued fishing licenses. Like the others, Flory seemed overly anxious and defensive. Barnaby cheerfully asked about getting a fishing license, gently teasing the man about his brand new suit and the expensive new car hidden away in the garage. "You know, new things have a way of bragging," Barnaby observed mildly, leaving Flory sweating behind his counter. Barnaby then asked for directions to a local hotel and made his way to the Clover House, run by a kind-hearted woman named Molly. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the prominent citizens of Parker Junction were falling into a state of absolute panic. Flory, Spake, B, and Eli Ryle gathered in secret. They were terrified. They knew that Barnaby was asking too many specific questions. They had checked his background and discovered he was a private detective. "He knows," Ryle whispered, pacing the room like a trapped animal. "I caught him walking around my property today. He saw my son wearing a fancy watch that I told the boy not to take." The truth was a complicated web of greed, but not one of malice born from pure evil. Weeks ago, a notorious skyjacker had bailed out of an airplane 100 miles from Parker Junction, carrying a fortune of $1 million in unmarked bills. The skyjacker had perished in the wilderness, and Ryle had stumbled upon the money. Instead of reporting it, Ryle, desperate to save his beloved ranch from foreclosure, decided to keep it. However, his sudden wealth did not go unnoticed. Flory, Spake, and B figured out his secret and demanded a share of the fortune to keep quiet. Then, Johnny Arthur, who was secretly the mastermind behind the skyjacking, arrived in town looking for his missing partner and the money. In a tragic misunderstanding and a moment of panic in the dark woods, Arthur had suffered a fatal accident. Nick Gorman had then arrived looking for Arthur, causing the town council to panic even further. They orchestrated a plan to scare Nick away, which ended in a tragic hit-and-run accident driven by sheer, blinding fear rather than cold-blooded murder. Now, a young local mechanic named Russ had also figured out the secret and was demanding money. The council members were turning on each other, paralyzed by suspicion and guilt. Unaware of the full extent of their frantic plotting, Barnaby decided to spend his evening at the local tavern. He walked in, greeting the nervous council members who were huddled around a table. "Evening, gentlemen," Barnaby said cheerfully. "Looks like a town council meeting." The bartender approached. "Beer. Would you believe I could have a tall glass of milk?" Barnaby asked with a twinkle in his eye. "Yes, sir," the bartender replied. "A shot of whiskey in it, or a double?" "Straight milk," Barnaby answered, much to the bewilderment of the room. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his milk and looked over at Florey. "Well, Mr. Florey, it looks like I am going to have my car fixed after all. Though I do not know who is going to do it, since you told me your mechanic Russ took off for parts unknown." Florey shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Barnaby continued, his voice calm and conversational. "It does seem strange. Why would a healthy young man leave town without taking all his things with him? Clothes, skis, pictures of his family? Not to mention his beautiful little house. It seems to me he would want to sell that before he went anywhere." The council members exchanged terrified glances. Barnaby finished his milk, left a generous tip, and bid them a good night, stating that the mountain air made him very sleepy. The next morning, Barnaby received a telephone call from Betty. She was bursting with exciting news. She had dug through all the old newspaper records and connected the dots perfectly. "Barnaby," Betty said through the receiver, her voice filled with excitement. "There were no bank robberies, but there was a skyjacker who bailed out with $1 million. They never found him, and Nick Gorman and Johnny Arthur were paratroopers together in the service." Barnaby smiled, deeply proud of her brilliant detective work. "You figured it out, Betty. Nick probably planned the whole thing for Johnny Arthur. When Johnny disappeared with the money, Nick came looking for him. Somebody here in Parker Junction found that money first, and when they realized Nick and Johnny were looking for it, panic set in. It is a carousel of greed, Betty, but we're going to stop it today without anyone else getting hurt." Barnaby knew that confronting frightened people directly could lead to unnecessary danger. He needed a peaceful resolution. He drove his car out to the Ryle Ranch, knowing the guilty parties would follow him, desperate to protect their secret. He parked near the edge of the beautiful, sprawling property. Soon enough, the vehicles of the town council arrived, kicking up dust on the dirt road. The local sheriff, who had unfortunately also been swayed by the promise of easy money, stepped out of his patrol car alongside Spake, Florey, B., and Ryle. "You are trespassing again, Mr. Jones," the sheriff said, trying to sound authoritative, though his hands were shaking. Barnaby leaned against his car, completely relaxed. "I have a message for you, Spake. The state police are on their way over here right now. They're going to pick up that vehicle you were driving the day of the terrible accident involving Mr. Gorman." Spake panicked instantly. "Not me. I was not driving. It was Ryle and his vehicle." "It does not make any difference," Barnaby said calmly, pressing the advantage. "The left headlight was shattered on impact. The laboratory has pieces of glass they found, and they will match up perfectly." "I was not driving," Spake shouted, waving his arms in distress. Florey grabbed Spake by the shoulder. "Can you not keep your mouth shut? You are doing exactly what he wants you to do." Ryle stepped forward, his face pale with stress. "Look, Mr. Jones, you have got to believe me. When I found that suitcase full of money in the woods, I was going to turn it all in. I really was. But I was about to lose my ranch. I built this place with my own 2 hands. I needed the money to save my home. Then the others found out and moved in on me, demanding their share." B began to cry softly, the weight of their collective mistakes finally crashing down upon her. We were just so scared. We never meant for anyone to get hurt. Greed got the better of all of us. Barnaby looked at them with a mixture of pity and stern disappointment. Greed is a heavy burden to carry. It makes you see enemies where there are none, and it turns good neighbors against each other. You let money cloud your judgment and compromise your morality. The sheriff looked at the ground, deeply ashamed of his failure to uphold the law. What happens now, Mr. Jones? Barnaby smiled gently and pointed toward the nearby trees. Out from behind the thick pine branches stepped Molly from the hotel, along with several other honest townsfolk, and Betty, who had driven up that morning. Well, Barnaby said kindly, since we have an audience who heard every word of your confessions, I believe the best thing for all of you to do is to go peacefully down to the station and tell the whole truth to the state police. It is the only way you will ever find peace of mind again. The council members, completely exhausted by their own deception, nodded in agreement. There was no struggle, no anger, only a profound sense of relief that the elaborate lie was finally over. The truth had been brought into the light, and justice would be served through the proper, peaceful channels. A few days later, Barnaby and Betty sat comfortably on the edge of the wooden dock by the lake. The air was fresh and sweet. Barnaby held his new fishing rod, watching the gentle ripples on the surface of the water. "Did you call Mrs. Gorman?" Barnaby asked, taking a bite of a delicious sandwich Betty had brought from the hotel. "I certainly did," Betty smiled, her heart full of joy. Because Eli Ryle carried full liability insurance on his vehicle, Helena stands to collect $20,000. It is more than enough to pay off her debts, buy clothes for the twins, and start a fresh, secure new life. "That is wonderful news," Barnaby said, his eyes crinkling with happiness. "And a judge formally charged those involved, which means Parker Junction is going to need some new, honest leadership. They even asked me if I would like to temporarily take over the job of sheriff." Betty laughed a bright, musical sound. "Are you going to accept?" "I might consider it," Barnaby mused, reeling in his lines slightly. "It would give me a wonderful excuse to get in some nice fishing over the next few weeks before the fish truly decide to quit for the season." The sun shone brightly over Parker Junction, a town that was finally beginning to heal. Through empathy, intellect, and a steadfast belief in the truth, Barnaby Jones had not only solved a complex mystery, but had also helped a grieving family find hope for the future. As Barnaby cast his line out into the sparkling blue water once more, he knew that despite the flaws of human nature, there was always room for redemption, honesty, and a peaceful afternoon by the lake.